Engage has finally released their Gen 3 and Gen 4 paddles. After a very long time of sticking with their gun and sticking with their Gen 1 paddle design and the same layout, they have finally switched from something quite different. And although I say it's different, I definitely would have a lot to say about that. I'm happy that Engage has decided to try something new. However, I don't consider these changes to be quite new. Their naming scheme for the Alpha Pro, the Alpha, and the Profoam are very generic names. In terms of the naming alone, the Alpha Pro and the Alphas aren't very creative. They have been used before for the 11624 paddles, which are also Gen 3 paddles. Not only that, but their gradient design is also very similar to the gradient design that 11624 also did. The Profoam is their Gen 4 take on foam. It is a high density foam core performance. And honestly, I definitely feel that high density part. It is a very, very stiff paddle. I had the chance to play test both the Alpha Pro, the 14 and the 16, and the Profoam. I have not had a chance to play with the Alpha, but I will update later if I ever get the chance to. As usual, we're not affiliated with any paddle companies at this time, and all opinions are of our own. All paddles are bought with our own money or lent by friends or family to allow us to entertain ourselves for testing. Anyone who has used the Joola Pro 4 will be very familiar with the Alpha Pro, especially the Hyperion shape. Testing them side by side with the 14 and 16, the Hyperion felt very similar with both similar pop and power. I would say the sweet spot is a little bit less on the Alpha Pros. The Alpha Pros were a little bit stiffer with less dwell. The 16mm Alpha Pro felt closest to how a Hyperion 14 would feel, which makes the 14mm probably the stiffest of the lot. I would say, however, the grit was definitely more consistent and better than the Hyperion. Under initial bounce, I really did not like the Profoam. It was really stiff and had the least amount of dwell. I had a really hard time getting along with it, as soon as I felt like the contact was made, it just gave me a feedback and it just left the paddle. I personally prefer paddles with a little more dwell, so I have a little more face to it. Because it's foam, like all the other foam paddles, it was, I wouldn't say necessarily muted, but the feeling is more homogeneous across the face, so it's hard to tell exactly where on the paddle I was hitting at times. The sweet spot was pretty decent, but I couldn't really tell if it was a sweet spot or not because of how the feeling is distributed. The pop on the Profoam was lower than the Alpha Pros, but the power felt essentially the same as the Alpha Pro 16. The grip, however, was really smooth and didn't feel like I was getting much spin overall. In terms of play testing, I felt that I was hitting it pretty flat, and it was definitely hitting pretty hard, but I definitely felt like I was able to get the same touch and spin as I wanted to. The Profoam is definitely a little head heavier than the Alpha Pros, and the handle tapers earlier than the Alpha Pro, so for people that are using two-handed shots, you might feel like it's a little cramped. After adding 3 grams of weight around the 3 and 9 position of the paddles, I definitely felt that I liked them a lot more. I get a little more dwell by adding the weights on there, so the Alpha Pro and the Profoam felt a lot better. I was happy playing with the Alpha Pro stock, well at least the 16, but with weight it basically felt like a Joola Pro 4 Hyperion 14mm with better grit. The Profoam, however, felt a little bit more tolerable for what I would want. It still definitely lacked a little bit of the spin I wanted, but because it dwelled a little bit more and it felt a little bit softer when I had it, it felt similar to potentially a Carbon or Vatic Pro. Overall, I would say Engage did a pretty decent job with these Gen 3 and Gen 4 paddles. However, at the price, I would say it's a little conflicting. The Alpha Pros go for $260 and the Profoams are $230, while the Alpha are $200. All their paddles do come with a lifetime warranty, however, so in terms of value, that is something to be considered. I would say in terms of performance alone, though, the Alpha Pros are actually pretty solid paddles. The Profoam, however, felt like a pretty fair paddle, but in terms of the competition it has with all the other foam paddles, hard to say. If you were already planning on spending $280 on a Joola Pro 4, then I would consider taking a look at the Alpha Pro.